Welcome to ancient Rome. In this episode, you will be walking along the historic streets of the Roman Forum, which was the heart and soul of the Roman Empire from 800 BC to 400 AD. You will hear about all the temples, basilicas, and emperors of Rome in that time. We take you down the main boulevard of the Forum, where the emperors would parade with their spoils of faraway victories, which always included gold and plants and many exotic animals that no one had ever seen before. We tell you all about the most famous leader of all, Caesar, his life, and how he died. Palatine Hill overlooks the Forum area, and this is where the emperors built their palaces. So listen as we take you up the 7 levels of the Imperial ramp with its 35-metre high ceilings to the top of Palatine Hill. We share the views from the top and also the remains of the palaces and their private grounds, including a swimming pool and private arena area. Walk with us as we leave the Forum past Titus's Arch and enter one of the most well-known historic buildings in the world, the Colosseum. We were able to visit the arena floor, which is where all the action happened, and get a great insight into the tunnels, the cells and trapdoors. Spoiler alert, there were 88 of them. Listen as we transport you to those ancient times when the Colosseum was a capacity with 50,000 screaming spectators enjoying the entertainment of the day. You'll want to stay listening to the end to find out exactly what that entertainment was. Actually, you might not call it entertainment. And also what the crowds had barbecued for lunch. And no, it wasn't another shrimp on the barbie. Don't forget, if you want to see all the pictures and find the link to the tour we did in this episode, then go to the podcast player you're listening on now and click the link in the podcast description to episode 66. If you know anyone planning a trip to Italy, then please share our Italian podcast series with them at www.beachtravelwine.com/Italy. Please enjoy episode 66, all about ancient Rome. Cheers! And welcome to the Beach Travel Wine podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Leanne.
And I'm Lyle, and this is the travel podcast for beach-loving, wine-drinking couples over 50.
So if that sounds like you, grab yourself a drink, sit back, relax and listen as we go travelling the world, one wine at a time.
Cheers.
Good morning, Lyle. How are you today? We're back in the podcast studio.
Buongiorno, Leonita.
As I said in the previous part, introduction is the word I'm looking for. We're talking all about the history of Rome today, and that includes obviously the Forum and the Palatine Hill and the Colosseum, which is basically right in the heart of Rome. But how do we get there? When you're staying in Rome, what's the best place? What's the best way to get to the Forum, which is where we're going to start our tour today?
Well, you can either walk. It's not far from anywhere really, or there are buses, and there is the metro, and there's a metro station basically right at the Colosseum.
Oh, I didn't see that. Well, because we were able to walk because, well, it isn't that big a city really, is it?
No, not at all.
So it was about a 20-minute walk for us, and we met our guide.
Yeah, Diego.
He was great, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was fabulous. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not as big into history as you've probably all learnt by now as Lyle is, and this guy was even dressed differently. He had a bright sort of Hawaiian shirt on and a cute little hat, and he had some sort of chain and flag hanging on his thing that we were following around. Yeah, he was really enthusiastic and great. But so the ticket, I wanted to see the Colosseum. That's what I wanted to book. So I want, like that, as everyone does. But it also included,
so it includes the Roman Forum, the Colosseum, and the Palatine Hill. Now the tickets, so it's a combination ticket. The tickets for adults are €16, 18 to 25 €2, and under 18 they're free. As far as I know, there's free entry the first Sunday of every month. You'll need about 3 hours minimum to see the whole thing. Yeah. And the other thing is that there are no signed. The monuments aren't signed, so if you don't do a guided tour, you're going to need a guidebook. We actually booked an online skip the line all-inclusive guided tour that included the Colosseum arena floor access, and it was about $100 Australian each.
Now the reason I booked this one was because it, like all the reviews and things, if you just do the normal Colosseum tour, you don't get to go out on that arena floor, and they made that sound pretty impressive as it was. So I'm glad we did that. Yeah. So, and just, like, I didn't know what the Roman Forum was. I know that sounds ignorant, but I could see lots of ruins and things, but I really had no idea, and I was just sort of following the guide so I could get to the Colosseum. But there was a lot to learn, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, like it's huge. It's and the first thing you notice is the Forum is well below the current modern street level.
Why is that though?
Well, back in the day, the sewage system stopped working after the Roman Empire fell, and the area of Rome and Forum often filled with debris and dirt brought by the river Tiber flooding. So just over centuries, the town just got buried under more and more rubbish.
And they dug it out, though.
Yeah. So,
but can I just say something quickly? I mean, I know you're going to give me the history now, but just for those lay people that, like me, just think of it this way: the Forum is the heart of Rome. It's where
ancient Rome.
Ancient Rome. That's right. Yeah. So when Lyle's telling you about the history, I'm going to jump in hopefully and just give you some sort of, some of my lay people's information, just to make it all make a bit more visual sense. More, I had the fluff, don't I? Anyway, Sorry, you go on with your history, because it's fascinating history, really.
Rome was founded on the 21st of April, 753 BC. I'm not sure why they had the 21st of April. How they knew that, but anyway. The site of the Roman Forum was originally marshland, and it was drained using the Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's first sewage systems, and converted into the public meeting place. Now, that particular sewage system, when they got it back working, that's now still being used in modern day Rome. So that to me is incredible. Around the 5th century BC, the space gradually expanded and transformed into the Forum through the construction of important temples such as the Temple of Saturn. It became the centre of public and political life in the city, the site of ceremonies, trials, and speeches.
So it was like the place where people would gather, like you didn't have your newspaper of the day, but everyone would go down to hear what the news was, and so people from around the outside of the city centre would go in there, yeah?
Yeah, it's sort of like, how I suppose in Western civilization now, you have that city square.
Yeah.
And so that, the senators, if they wanted to tell the population, new laws or what was going on, or anybody could actually get up. And so, yeah, it was...
maybe that's where the soapbox came from.
Probably. And yeah, in those days they didn't have newspapers, so that's what it was all about. Now, the Roman Forum was rediscovered in 1803 by the archaeologist Carlo Fia, who started to clean the area, and excavate work has been continuing ever since.
What was he?
He was an archaeologist.
One more time.
An archaeologist. I can't. I said it.
Archaeologist.
That's the one. An archaeologist.
Last practice that about 10 times.
Yeah,
you got it anyway.
I thought I got it there, but it's archaeological. No, I can't do it. But anyway, let's move on. The Forum.
And so the reason it was excavated, as Lyle alluded to before, was because, over the years, after it was sort of abandoned in a way, it got silted up every time the river flooded, right?
Yeah. So the Forum is located at the base of the Capitol Hill and the Palatine Hill. The Via Sacra is the main street that runs directly between the Arch of Titus and the Arch of Septimus Severus.
So this is the main drag of the Roman Forum, right? And it's long and it's straight. And if you walk down and you stand right sort of in the middle, which is where we entered, you look to your left, and there's, like this big long sort of paved road, I guess, with temples and ruins, which you're going to tell us about in a minute, and an arch that you're going to tell us about at one end. And then you look to the right, and even more so, like more columns and temples and things, and another arch at the other end. So there's this big, long main street. You actually
which is Via Sacra.
So you actually get the feeling it was important. There's just something about, about being standing there and in that street.
I think that, remember, the thing that really impressed me about Diego, he would say, "Imagine this."
Yeah, well, he said something. Can I say that now about like when the Empress came back? Because you're probably going to say that, but that's one of the things I do remember. He'd say, just stand here and imagine that, the Emperor has returned from one of his victories, and he's, all the town folk, and there was 1 million of them, have gathered.
At the time of Caeser, there was 1 million population,
and the town of, they've all gathered, and the Emperor in all his, uniforms, and his soldiers behind him, and he's often got his, his wife with him, and then behind him he's got all the spoils. So they've got the big the gladiator cart things. Well, not the carts, the wagons, right? So they've got.
You're talking about the chariots.
The chariots. There we go.
You reckon I had problems with archaeology? Still can't say.
I did. And so they're all sort of thundering up this the main street, and behind them they've got all the spoils of war. There's gold, and they've got all the slaves that they've brought back, and they've got all the barrels full of spices, and the plants. They've brought the trees back, and plants and flowers and fruits and things. They've brought them all back, and then they've brought animals. There's giraffes and elephants, and this whole parade is making its way down this street, and you just can stand, and the way Diego's explaining it, you're just like, oh my gosh, it's it was pretty impressive, wasn't it, that main street?
So and basically the Forum is almost like a bit of a valley between, it is a valley between the two, the Capitol Hill,
yes,
and also the Palatine Hill.
Right.
Now the Capitol Hill basically was where the Senate building was,
yes,
and then at the Palatine Hill was where the palace was,
yes.
and between there you've got the Arch of Titus.
Yes,
that's at the Palatine end, and that was to commemorate both the military triumph of Titus and his father Vespasian, with their victory and in the Jewish wars. Titus became emperor in 79 AD. He completed construction of the Flavian Amphitheatre, better known as the Colosseum, and opened it with ceremonies lasting 100 days.
Yeah, and we've got a whole lot more on the Colosseum coming up. Yes.
Yep.
As you were saying, at one end there's the Arch of Titus.
Yep.
Yeah, and at the other end.
Yeah, there's the Arch of Septimius Severus. And now that's a white marble triumphant arch. So it's really, they're the same as the Arc de Triomphe. It's whenever they'd have big battles, they'd come up with these arches. And then it was dedicated in 2003 AD to commemorate the Parthian.
203 AD.
203. What did I say?
2003.
Oh, sorry. 2000. I did that before.
Yeah.
In 2003. 203 AD to commemorate the Parthian victories of the emperor and his two sons after the death of Septimius Severus. His sons, Caracalla and Greta, were initially joint emperors. Now, this is the interesting part. Caracalla had Greta assassinated in 2012. Greta's memorials were destroyed, and all images of mentions of him were removed from the public buildings and monuments. And this sort of stuff used to happen all the time.
But so let me get this straight. The guys build an arch after he's been victory, and he died. So he's this wonderful, emperor that's won a war.
Severus, yeah.
Yep. And so he dies, and before he dies, anyway, he makes his two sons emperors. So he's built this huge arch. It's still standing. It's one of the only things that's still really.
Yeah, it's one of the iconic ones.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the little buggers kill each other. One kills each other. One kills the other.
Yeah, the eldest killed his younger brother.
Yeah.
And basically removed all evidence that his brother actually existed.
But before you move on, I actually got some nice photos of the different arches, and the Titus Arch has like some really amazing decoration on it, so I've been up under that and got some photos. So that's if you go to the description in the podcast player that you're listening to now, and the link to podcast blog post that goes with this is episode 66. The link's there, or just go to beachtrouble1.com/podcast and be episode 66. So there's lots of photos of what we're talking about, and it'll help put the picture together for you.
Now, one of the first temples, which was the ancient temple of Saturn, traditionally dated at 497 BC, stands at the foot of Capitol Hill. So it's still there. It's one of those iconic images.
Yeah.
So the pediment and the 8 surviving columns represents one of it's one of the first. It's still there. There's the 8 columns, and it looks fabulous.
Yeah, and I've got a nice view of that sort of, because we went past sort of at the end of the day as well, and I've got some nice photos of that.
Yeah, well, that's quite close to the Senate building. Another temple, the Temple of Caeser and Pollux, was originally built in gratitude for a victory at the Battle of the Lake Regillus in 495 BC.
So really, they have a battle and they build a temple.
Yeah, if they win the battle, yeah. So they're not shy.
Or an arch or a...
Yeah. Just 3 columns stand. Legend tells these heroes, the sons of Jupiter and Leda. Now, these are gods, ancient gods. So, it's all about mythology, really.
Yeah.
Appeared on the spot to help the forces of the Roman Republic. So to overcome the last king of Rome. So
I've got a really nice photo of those 3 columns. They sort of are just standing there sort of majestically on their own. It's quite even though it's not much of the temple left, what's standing there is stately, I would say.
And basically right next to them, towards the Capitol Hill, you'll see the Curia Julia, which is the Senate House, and that was ordered to be built by Julius Caesar. Buildings works were interrupted by his assassination.
Well, that'll do it every time.
Yeah. And that was the meeting place for the Senate, undoubtedly one of the most important political buildings in Rome.
So at this stage, where as you're facing sort of Capitol Hill and Palatine Hill, this is all down to the right towards the away from the Colosseum. This is the area you're talking about down there, and you can imagine these, the Senate members all wandering down there towards that big Senate building, past these temples on the way, which is down near that second arch, isn't? Yeah. So really, you can imagine the town as it was, the city as it was back then, even with the ruins that are there.
Yeah, and then just near there's also the original basilica. Now, the basilica in Roman times, it wasn't the church. No, what they did, the church actually took the name basilica for the churches from ancient Rome.
Yes.
The basilica actually was the courthouse. So they've got ruins of that. And then the next thing you see is the Temple of Caesar.
Yeah, that's true.
It was begun by Augustus Octavia, which it was his adopted son. In 42 BC, the Senate worshipped Julius Caesar posthumously. So, even though they died, even though they were conspirators in his death. Now, Augustus dedicated the temple to Caesar on August 1829 BC after the Battle of Actium. It stands on the east side of the main square on the site of Julius Caesar's cremation. Only the remnants of a cement core and podium of the Temple of Caesar remains. The Temple of Caesar was largely dismantled in the 15th century.
Yeah, that is a little bit disappointing. You sort of imagine that the Temple of Caesar will be, something impressive, but there's not much. Someone's obviously pulled it apart, but people still go there and lay flowers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So you've sort of, now we're at the stage where we can either keep on going along and describing the forum, or I thought it was best that we now talk about the life of Caesar.
Okay, give it to us. The life of Julius Caesar.
Well, you've got to...
He's one of the most famous sort of Roman emperors, right?
Well, he's probably one of the most famous men ever in history. And you can't really describe the forum without talking about the life of Julius Caesar. Look, when he was the reigning ruler, there was a population, as Leanne said, of about 1 million people.
And to put that in perspective, I said I wasn't going to say anything, sorry. To put that in perspective, like most of the other big cities of the world, like or around, only had like about 100 or 150,000, So, when people came into the Forum, like to Rome, they just couldn't believe, how powerful they must be with all these people. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, he was a bit of a gambler. He owed a lot of money. He borrowed to fund election campaigns to stage Olympic type games and dole out free grain and other typical expenses of candidates and office holders.
Now I could say something very political there, but
what's
I
that?
won't. Well, who gives out money for games and things and then they get in debt?
Yeah, that's true. We'll move on. Now, because he owed so much money, he needed someone basically to sponsor him. And the guy that sponsored him was the richest man in Rome.
So sponsor as in, lend him money.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Now, his name was Marcus Crassus, one of the wealthiest and politically influential men in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they say that Julius Caesar had to continue to conquer so that he could pay his debts.
Right, so he had to go off and get gold and slaves and
and one of them
plants and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, okay. So one of the main, I suppose, income was the buying and selling of slaves. Now, Julius Caesar began his rise to power in 60 BC by forcing an alliance with another general, Pompey, and the wealthy Crassus.
So if you're anything like me, you're like, oh, Pompeii, wasn't that a place? Oh, yeah, but it was a person first.
Yeah. But at that stage, both Julius Caesar and Pompey were generals. Now,
I just didn't know Pompey was a person. Okay, just saying. Now I
think actually his real name is Pompeius, but they short it down to, or they westernized it by Pompey. Together, the three men assumed control of the Roman Republic, and Caesar was thrust into the position of consul. Now, before there was the Republic, when it was a Republic before it became an empire, there was two consuls of Rome. So
Caesar.
Well,
yeah,
Caesar and someone else. Now, they actually controlled Rome.
Right.
Now, there was always two consuls.
Right.
And each consul could actually veto the other consul.
Okay.
And they were only consuls for a year, and they were voted in by the Senate. So, really, Caesar's first real power was when he became consul.
Okay. So obviously that was pretty cool for him.
After Crassus's death, Caesar and Pompey remained allies for a few years. Pompey, however, moved to form alliances to counterbalance Caesar's influence. So they're starting to have a fallout, because Crassus is gone. The deteriorating trust through 50 BC pushed Caesar into an open rebellion in January 49 BC. In other words, they went civil war. Yeah. So basically, Julius Caesar against Pompey. This used to, and there was a previous civil war earlier, and this is really how most emperors were actually decided in the future, was through these wars.
Okay.
Now, he took control of the Roman Empire under the first triumvirate, eventually assuming dictatorship in 46 BC. He held this position until his assassination in 44 BC.
Well, that wasn't long, was it?
No, it was a couple of years. Yeah, and basically what it was the Senate and probably influential people
decided he was too powerful.
He decided he was too powerful, so they had to get rid of him.
Right.
Now, his son, or actually his stepson,
his heir,
was, and this is where the other thing you've got to understand about the Roman Empire. If Julius Caesar, he had a daughter, but he didn't have any sons. So to keep power and with their dynasty, they would adopt children.
Mm-hmm.
And Caesar's heir, Octavian, and Lieutenant Mark Antony defeated Caesar's assassins in 42 BC.
Yeah. So,
but they finally split. Yeah. Antony's defeat alongside his ally and lover, Cleopatra, at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, and the Senate's grant of extraordinary power to Octavian as Augustan in 27 BC, which effectively made him the first Roman emperor, marked the end of the Republic. So you've got to understand that Caesar actually technically was never an emperor.
Right. No.
Okay, he was a dictator, but his son, through the power of the Senate, became the first emperor.
Right. Okay.
Now, so
interesting.
Now, how were the emperors? So all of a sudden, the Republic's finished.
Mm-hmm.
We're going into the Imperial Rome. Now, how were these emperors chosen?
That was my next question.
Okay, so there was really 4 ways. There was the hereditary rule.
Yes.
Which is Octavian.
Yeah.
Or fighting amongst private armies.
Oh. So soldiers.
Yeah, soldiers, basically. And actually the soldiers, if there was a big victory, the soldiers actually would vote that their general was the new emperor. So there was, at times, more than one emperor of Rome.
Oh, okay.
And then there was, or you were invested with the imperial title by the Senate, or both of those. Mm-hmm. Now, when the thing that really confused me about this is when you go through and you're reading through all the emperors and all this sort of stuff, they all had the name Caesar. Well, most of them had the name Caesar, and they also had the name Augustus.
Right.
And it just confused me. So I went in and I had a look at it. When an emperor or Augustus, so Augustus actually is a title of emperor.
Right.
So, but they're basically the same thing. Named an heir to the throne, that heir would be known as Caesar. Mm-hmm. Okay, until his accession, when he would take the title of Augustus. Okay. So that's how that worked. Now, what actually caused the Rome to fall?
Well, that once again was my next question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, but yeah, good. You go. I was wondering that.
Okay, so basically, it was corrupt.
Because it was pretty, like they had 1 million people and they had all this wealth and but once again, the leaders can't help themselves. There's always corruption.
Yeah. And so, there was corruption locally.
And then everyone wanted power, so, they're dividing the empire up, I guess.
Well, and also the fact that the empire was so big.
Yes.
So you had, what would happen is that the Senate or the emperors would send governors out to, for instance, Spain or France, or what was called Gaul in those days, and the governors were responsible for collecting taxes.
Oh, and who's going to know if they get them?
Yeah. So you can see what the problem's going to be.
Yeah. And I guess if they got weaker, then they're open to invasion by other people.
Well, the people in these provinces, they were getting pissed off that they were getting ripped off by the governors because the governors, the only way they made money was basically by overtaxing.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, all these provinces started attacking
each other, and then
and then all of a sudden there was also the invasion by the Germanic tribes. So the last emperor was Romulus Augustus. He was only an adolescent when he became emperor and was deposed from the throne in 476 AD by Odoacer, a leader of a Germanic tribe. Now, at that stage, there was only 80 to 100,000 people in Rome. After the fall of the Roman Empire, which marked the beginning of the Middle Ages, Rome slowly fell under the control of the papacy.
Papacy, so
that's the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And in the 8th century, it became capital of the Papal States, which lasted until 1870. So that was 1,114 years as a papal state.
So let's keep moving through the Roman Forum.
Yep.
So we've gone past Caesar's temple. and we go to now the House of the Vestal Virgins, right?
Correct.
It was big, yeah.
Yeah, and the priestesses these were the Vestal Virgins were the priestesses who took the vow of chastity and tended the sacred flame of the goddess of Vesta. Now, again, through mythology, and it basically came down to the Vestal Virgins, and they had to remain chaste for 30 years, and they were not allowed to let the flame go out, because if the flame went out, it basically was the start of bad luck.
Oh, so that must happen about the fall of the empire, 476 AD, did you say?
I'd say that maybe all the candles went out right then, right then and there. Okay. But you can actually walk through the House of the Vestals.
Yeah.
And then, like once we saw that, we moved towards the Palatine end.
Yeah. The Palatine Hill. So as I was saying, you've got the main street, and you've got the temples and the basilicas, and this house here, and it's all pretty narrow, this area, but it all sits at the bottom of the one end of it sits at the bottom of Palatine Hill, right?
Yeah,
and that's basically where, after a while, emperors started building their palaces.
Correct. Yeah. So look, one of probably the last thing you actually see is called the Basilica of Maxentius and Constantine. This was bloody huge.
Oh, yes.
So the vast structure was constructed in 312 AD. It was the largest building in Rome and was used as a courthouse and meeting hall. The basilica stood on a 100 by 65 metre concrete rectangular platform. For our American listeners, 328 feet by 213 feet. The central nave was 80 metres long, 25 metres wide, and 35 metres high.
Now, Diego, our guide, this was his favourite place. Like he was just blown away, has always been blown away by the absolute size of this place. Now, it's obviously not the full building, but it had three big arches in it, or not arches, domes, ceilings, and those ceilings were decorated in like these octagon sort of shapes, like great big octagons, and they were held up there, and you can see them still up there, but there is one on the ground, and the size of this thing is like massive. And
you got to wonder how they built them.
The vastness, and that's what Diego was going on about. And so that's when you're at the bottom of Palatine Hill, looking across the Forum, and that's on the other side. It is just amazing, and we actually got to walk through that before we headed off out of this area. And you think it's big when you're standing back looking at it, but when you're there underneath this 80 metre high ceiling, it's pretty amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that was the courthouse. And what led me then to think, well, what was Roman law about? And there was four main pillars of Roman law, and the pillars were equal treatment under the law, innocent until proven guilty, the burden of proof is on the accuser, unfair laws can be disregarded. So pretty much like basically common law today. So
that's pretty cool.
And as Leanne said, that was the building was so big and so huge. And again, that symbolism of power, I think just the size of the buildings. And look, as much as, I feel like apologising to go because we've done the history of the buildings, but I think you can't just describe the building without talking about understanding it. So now the next thing we did, and this was only discovered in 1900, was the Imperial ramp.
Yes, and now, once again, Diego said most of the tour guides don't take you on the Imperial ramp. And I don't know why, but it's a little bit out of the way. But I've got some really great photos of this ramp, and it's, you describe it.
Okay. The 7-level ramp was built by Emperor Domitian in the 1st century AD to serve as a majestic entry from the Forum to the Imperial Palace. It's actually the walls are 35 metres high. Yeah. It is huge, and they're 150. In other words, 115 feet. once at the top of the ramps, tell me about the views.
Well, yes, I will, but I'm just trying to, like make sure people understand. It's not just like a ramp to walk up. It's and it's covered. It's a big archway. Like it's a big covered 7-tier. Was it? Did you say like you go up
7 levels?
7 levels. So you go.
It was for their horses to go.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. So you're on your chariot or your what? That's the right word.
That's the word. Yeah. Chariot,
wagon.
not the cart.
Yeah, and it takes you all the way up these 7 levels as you sort of wind your way around, and the huge big ceiling that covers it, and there's some little windows along the way as well, and so they would have gone up there centuries ago, and then when you get to the top of Palatine Hill, as Lyle said, there's a big viewing platform, I guess you'd call it, and there's a few different levels. So the first one we sort of stopped at basically gives you a view back down over the whole forum, and I've got a fabulous photo of that, and you get a bit more of a perspective of the streets and the layout of it, and of course over to the big basilica that you were talking about a minute ago, and then if you go up further around the other side, you basically have 360-degree views of the city of Rome. So you have the Forum, and of course then you've got the Colosseum in the distance, and then you've got all the way around.
We can actually see across to the St. Peter's Basilica.
Yeah, the modern. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say modern. That's not really modern, but the rest of Rome. That's right. So it's probably the best views. One of the places because it's all the way around. Yeah.
Well, what you're going to understand is that the palace, the Palatine Palace. It was the start of and it was built in 27 BC, or started by Augustus, and over time, it eventually, was pulled down, and another emperor built another one, and another one, an emperor built another one, and they all became more and more elaborate.
It's mostly ruins.
Now it is. But the main thing you see is actually the ruins of the palace of Dimitina. I didn't say that right. Domitian. Now, originally, as I said, Augustus, Caesar's adopted son, he built the first one. He also built the Temple of Apollo between 36 and 28 BC. And he was the god of oracle, hearing, and the young. The temple was damaged in the Great Fire of 64, but restored by Domitian before its final destruction in 363 AD. Only partial remains survive.
So can we talk about the stadium and the swimming pool and the gardens? Are we... can I tell people about how beautiful they were?
Oh, absolutely.
So, like obviously, there's different emperors building different palaces and they're getting bigger and bigger. But they had a whole stadium that they had set up for their private use.
And they call that the Hippodrome.
Okay. And, obviously they had people competing in there, and I've got some fabulous photos of that because it's this big oval, and you can see the private viewing box on one side, and then like the tiered seats on another. That's amazing, and like stadium, I guess, private arena is what you call it. They all they had a swimming pool.
Yeah.
So can you imagine that? Like how many centuries ago they actually had a swimming pool, and then rose gardens.
Yes, that was. They were established not in Rome. They were established in 1537 by Cardinal Farnese. Began a program of building and excavating on the Palatine. But one of the remaining projects from this era still visible are the rose gardens.
And you know how I like a garden, and there's some not just roses in there though. There's some beautiful trees and things, and that's sort of in the middle at the flat bit on top of the hill. And this hill wasn't always flat. They flattened it out to build their palaces and stuff on it. And some fountains. I remember Diego telling us about the marble and stuff in the fountains.
And there are structures that are the bases of fountains, some with intact coloured marble flooring.
It's still there.
Another with an octagonal shape.
Yeah. So, and they're sort of up, like it's a big area. It's a bit hard to explain. It's on top of a hill. There's sort of ruins of palaces, and then they've got the stadium and the pools and the fountains and the gardens. It's like a big palace sort of what would you call it, enclosure?
Yeah, like it was. I think the size of it was 131 acres or 53 hectares. So it was huge.
Yeah, it was big. Yeah.
And you've also got near the house of Augustus is located near the so-called hut of Romulus and the house of Livia, who was the wife of Augustus. Now, the hut of Romulus.
Yes.
I remember we saw the image of Rome is actually
one of the images of the Rome football team too. Yeah.
Is the she-wolf.
Yeah.
With the Romulus and Remus.
2 babies underneath.
Yeah.
So the story was that she found them?
Yeah, she found them. Well, and where she found them
she looked after them or brought them, whatever she did was there.
Yeah, it was the hut of Romulus.
Yeah, fascinating.
So it's full of mythology.
It is. When you leave the Palatine Hill with all those beautiful ruins and fountains and pools and, gardens and things, we went down a path back down towards the Forum, and it's probably one of the highlights of the day for me was we sort of walk around this area, and you got to imagine there's a lot of people walking around the Forum, and not as many up on Palatine Hill, but a lot down the Forum. And then all of a sudden we're in this sort of place where there's just our tour group, which wasn't that many, and Diego, and we're on a path, and you look out and there's the Colosseum. And it's sort of, we'd seen it walking up to the tour, but you can imagine that then, you're in the garden area, like downstairs, and they used to grow, lemons and things, they had the orchards and stuff. So it was sort of the view that I guess the people would have had of the Colosseum when they're leaving the Forum heading towards the Colosseum. Yeah, that just sort of stuck with me. That I've got some beautiful photos of that view. There's like trees around it and stuff. It was sort of very memorable for me. And then we had a short walk where we walked through the big basilica that we talked about and headed out a gate. I remember there was some.
Well, there was another arch.
Yeah, down there. It's like the Arc de Triomphe down the bottom. Remember there were people trying to get in the gate. Like people just are so, like it was locked, and they're trying to find a way around. Like, no, you got to walk all the way around. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So we're walking down, and we go past another big arch. Yes, and we arrive at the Colosseum. And everyone knows the Colosseum. We don't need to really describe it. However, we will. The Colosseum is can I tell you this story though first? When we got there, we had the skip the line tickets, and skip the line's a bit of a furphy because there's everybody with skip the line tickets. But we followed Diego, around, and it was like we're going around the mulberry bush. But we finally got to where our entrance was to go onto the arena floor, and Diego says he's chatting away, and I'm wandering around taking photos. You do remember this? And I said to him, Diego, how long did it take to build? Do you remember what he said to me?
I've told you this several times.
He said,
but I will tell you again.
Yeah, I'll tell you one more time. And so I was like, okay, sorry, I got in a bit of trouble. It took 9 years.
Yeah, from 72 AD to late 80 AD.
And he said they worked day and night.
Yep.
Yeah, on it. So this was like the entertainment centre, wasn't it?
Yeah, they had the gladiator shows.
Yes, well, we're going to talk about those.
They took place at the Colosseum, and the spectators basically saw the fights as entertainment.
Right. So the Colosseum has 80 arches around on 3 levels, so that's over 240 arches. And when you think of the Colosseum, that's what you see. It had 5 rings, and you start at the outside and you go in, but half of those, I think there's on one side's intact still with those 5 rings, but the other side there's only 3 because of an earthquake. Yeah.
Yeah, the earthquake was in 1349, and it basically split the facade.
Yeah, so And that's, once again, that iconic picture where you see, like the all the levels, and then you've got the arches, and then the only part of it. But you can still walk around all the way inside of it. Now, the Colosseum is obviously, people know it because of the gladiators.
Yeah.
Right? But originally, it was full of water. So the arena floor, wasn't it? Or it wasn't arena floor, was it? Yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
And because they
used to reenact naval battles.
Yeah, yeah. Which there's somewhere else, another arena in Milan.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So that was quite normal, I guess. But what they did was they on the outside of the arches they had numbers.
Yep.
And turnstiles, ancient turnstiles.
Yeah, so there was no different than going to a modern football stadium where they had the number on the gate.
Yeah, but there were 80 of them.
There was 80 gates, and they could fit 50,000 people.
Right. So they all got in. They were apparently really quick and out. Really quick. Like that was, the logistics were good, but you had to have a ticket as well. And apparently you got a ticket. Like you couldn't just buy a ticket. You got given a ticket by the nobles or the politicians at the time, and they were just like, I guess it was like the what do they call it today? The boxes where you go, like the sponsors boxes.
Yeah, yeah.
You get
modern bribery, basically.
There we go. But when the Colosseum was drained, it then became they put a floor over the top, and underneath that floor was all the little streets and little rooms and corridors and stuff.
Tunnels.
There we go.
That's the word.
And above those tunnels was it 88 trapdoors in the arena floor. So, and each one of those trapdoors had an elevator that was operated by 8 slaves.
Yeah, a lift, basically, yeah.
So what this was, as you said, it was entertainment. So what used to happen was the activities would go all day. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah? Are you with me?
Yeah.
Yes? And they would start with, like the sort of least entertaining. I guess it's a bit like going to an outdoor concert. Yeah, they have the least impressive artist on first, yeah? And
well, I think that was also, I think part of that was the execution.
Oh yes, they did that. And, they had like normal like performers as well, and then ended with the highlight of the day was the gladiators.
Yeah, and the gladiators were basically slaves.
But they didn't want them to die.
No, because everybody thinks you just have the thumbs up and the thumbs down. That's the typical movie thing. But basically, the guys that promoted the events and actually trained the gladiators, they didn't want to see their investments killed needlessly.
So and sometimes they did have to beg for their lives, apparently.
Yeah.
Now, there's one thing I'm going to admit. I had not watched the movie Gladiator, and I'm ashamed to say that now, because I think my sons, at least, had watched it I don't know how many times, and I, obviously didn't do it. And, my daughter just shook her head and was just like, well, because I was saying to them, did you know that, the gladiators did this and this happened? And they looked at me with these looks on their faces as if to say, yes, you do, Mum, because that's basically what the Gladiator movie is about. So after we'd left the Colosseum, I sprinted home, like literally, didn't I? Just, put the backpack on and sprinted home to watch the Gladiator. And I loved it.
Yeah, and basically the story itself is based on the history, the time and history, and the guy it was Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius in the movie was the last of the emperor, and it it suggested that Commodus, his son, actually killed him. That's not true.
No,
but it was true that Commodus did perform as a gladiator, and when Maximus, which was Russell Crowe, killed Commodus in the arena, that wasn't true. But
that's a good story, like.
Oh yeah, but the thing about Marcus Aurelius' son, he was very, very narcissistic. He was a good-looking guy, And so so it was sort of based around the true story.
Fascinating. Yeah. Now I know you've got some information about the Colosseum, and then I want to come back to the elevators and the trapdoors and what actually happened. What Diego told us about it. So it had a retractable roof, didn't it?
Yeah, the Colosseum had a retractable roof. On hot days, an awning called a velarium was unfurled above the upper deck to shade spectators from the sun. Now, interestingly, the upper deck,
there were 4 levels, right?
Yeah, the 4th level. On the ladies that attended, they had to go to the 4th level, so the highest level.
And those stairs weren't easy to get up.
They were really ragged. It was almost like steep. Yeah, it was almost like Cinque Terre. The hike we did. So there. The women they were worse. So
the women were on top. The top level, and the nobles were at the bottom, and everyone else was in between.
Yeah, so now these velariums, they were operated by sailors from the Roman Navy and who were stationed around the top of the Colosseum. Now, we know that this retractable roof exists because Diego showed us the coins that were minted at the time that actually showed the sails.
I was fascinated with the stories Diego told us about the entertainment inside the Colosseum. I don't know what I thought went on in there, to be honest, but
I'm not sure what you thought went on there either.
But some of the stuff he told us. Now, picture this. You've got what's underneath the arena floor? The tunnels, and there's little rooms down there.
Yeah, right? They called it the tunnels were called the hypogeum.
Okay.
The hypogeum. Yep.
Okay. So that's underneath the floor, and there's 88 trapdoors. Now, as I've mentioned before, each trapdoor has an elevator, which is like a intricate sort of pulley system, wasn't it?
Correct.
Yeah. Now, at any time, there could be one, or not one, that'd be boring, but there could be, 2, 20, all 88 trapdoors could open. You didn't know what was going to come out. Now, out of those trapdoors would be prisoners and slaves.
Yep.
And wild animals.
Correct.
Right? And depending on, obviously it's fight to the death. So you could have, a lion and 2 prisoners. You could have, a wild bear. It was just horrendous, right?
Well, and you've also got the gladiators.
Yeah, but that was later. Yeah, I'm talking about like the gladiators didn't fight with the beasts, did they? Yeah. They did. Okay. Well, but what happened was they'd fight to the death. So you'd have before the gladiators, because this was like the gladiators were the last entertainment of the day. So this was sort of midday, I imagine, when everybody's wanting a bit more gore in their day, and once they'd fought to death. So what happened? If a prisoner got killed, right, they would cut that prisoner up and feed it to the animals waiting downstairs.
Correct.
Right? But if an animal got killed, they would cut that animal up
and barbecue it and feed it to the spectators. True story.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe that.
But when you think about it, it makes sense.
Oh yeah, well,
instead of having like a T-bone steak, you had a T-bone lion.
But they also had things like they would catapult prisoners across the arena.
Oh yeah.
Or they nail them to a cross, sometimes upside down. Like it was dreadful, and as you said, public executions, and people are cheering on, and then of course after that, the highlight of the day was the gladiator fights, as you said, and they're highly trained,
But most of those were slaves, so and you could, I think, if you won a certain amount of
you could get out.
Gladiator fights,
yes,
you could gain your freedom. But the most famous gladiator was a Greek guy called Spartacus, and he actually led a slave rebellion.
Did he?
Yes, he did. I knew you didn't know that. I just thought I'd throw that in at the end.
So that's so we're finding out all this as you're looking down over the tunnels and the trapdoors. There's a trapdoor left there, and then from there you're looking up around the seats of the Colosseum, and obviously you can't imagine what it'd be like, but it would have been terrifying. And there's just, as you said, was it 40,000 or 50,000 people on these different levels, all, like cheering, and it'd be a bit like, a football match today, obviously. But and then Diego, what were you going to say?
Well, you're saying how it looked. Like the two most prominent movies I can think of the gladiator fights there was one called Ben-Hur.
No.
And that was back in the 50s.
Random,
and
right?
That was it was about a famous chariot race.
Okay, yeah.
And it was about, there was another one called Spartacus.
Yes, and also Gladiator.
And also Gladiator. And, to be honest, after watching those movies, it's so easy standing in the actual Colosseum and imagining what would happen.
But I think the also inside on the tour, because you get Diego, there's obviously like a display where they have models of what it was like, fully built, and they show the intricate workings of the elevators.
Pulley system.
Yeah, the pulley system. So there's a lot of that sort of tourist information stuff, which is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I certainly would recommend doing the tour with the arena floor, because that's where you get the whole experience of the Colosseum, I think.
Yeah, well, you look up into the stands and you can just imagine it, how it would have been.
And if you can also see the difference from the outside. There was a wealthy guy paid, and I don't know how long it took to get the outside of it cleaned. And obviously money ran out or time ran out, because, that was on the outside ring. The further you come inside, the more, not dirt, but grime is covered. But, this is a building that's been standing, for centuries.
Yeah.
Centuries and
Just
centuries.
explain the what you mean by the rings.
So there's 5 rings.
Yeah, so basically they're corridors.
Yeah, so 5. So that's right. So the outside and the earthquake that happened knocked half of the 2 of the rings out. So on one side there's only 3 rings.
Yeah, I think as I understand, I don't know how true this is, but because of the intricacy of the rings as the corridors and the 80 arches to get in, there's something like those 50,000 spectators could be exited within like 30 minutes.
And back in the day too, this is something else that Diego said, above the arches there's like where they used to put rods, and I didn't know what he was talking about, but he was talking about flags. So the whole thing, it had had the turnstiles, it had the gates, it had the 50,000 people with their tickets, and there's all this entertainment going on, and the roof's on, and it's like a carnival atmosphere, and every arch has got a flag.
There's lots of pageantry, and the same, similar to when they come back after victories and they come through the arches. There was all this pageantry, and it was all based, I think, symbolically to represent the emperors as being all powerful, and I think the fact that the emperor that Titus that built the Colosseum, it was all a big propaganda.
Well, it took 9 years, didn't it? But,
9 years isn't long.
No, and 100 days they partied when it opened.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
so 100 days.
So he liked to party as well. And it was always obviously to keep the citizens of Rome happy and happy with him as the emperor. So I find it intriguing. I love the whole thing, and I probably should apologise for my obsession with it all, but I got really quite interested in this because I listened to a couple of podcasts, which a guy by the name of Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, and he's done lots of podcasts on the history of Rome, and also another guy, Daniele Bocelli, and he has his podcast is called History and Fire, and he's done a couple of podcasts on Rome and Caravaggio. Yes,
well, and you do love your history, but that's okay. I was able to put my stories to it, and I enjoyed the experience as well. So I hope you've enjoyed our podcast history lesson, and we've wandered the streets with us and learnt something about the history of Rome,
of ancient Rome,
and because I certainly did. And another quick sort of hint for you, I would recommend going back at the end of the day as the sun's setting.
Oh yeah, we did that.
And you just get a completely different perspective. And I've got some photos of when we did that. So if you want to, like, there's lots of photos, as you can imagine, just, I don't know, so many of the Palatine Hill and the Forum and the Colosseum. Go to the podcast player on now, and the description there will have a link to podcast episode 66, the show notes, and that's where all the pictures are. And there's also a interactive map you can have a look at to see what we're talking about. Or just go to beachtravelwine.com and, you can find all our stuff there. And, of course, we're on Instagram as well. And if you know someone planning a trip to Italy, please share our podcast with them, because they need to know to get this tour, because I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well.
Should we ask for reviews?
Yeah, you can ask for reviews. Off you go.
Yeah, well, they say that the more reviews you get, the more, what's the word?
I don't know. Authority you show in the podcast apps? Yeah. I think what Lyle's saying is we would love it if you would go to the podcast app you're listening on now and leave us a 5-star review. Would be wonderful, yes?
Yes, nothing less.
Why would they?
Oh, exactly.
All right. We didn't have a wine at the Colosseum, did we?
No, we didn't. No.
But there are lots of restaurants overlooking the Colosseum that you could certainly go and enjoy a wine.
Well, we did have a wine at the second biggest Colosseum in the world.
Did we?
Yeah, that was at Verano.
Oh,
and we went and saw.
You're waffling now.
Albano.
There are lots of restaurants that around the Colosseum where you can certainly look, and especially at night, go and have dinner and look at the Colosseum. Anyway, thank you for joining us on episode 66, and we'll see you next time. So it's goodbye from me.
Arrivederci from me.